Welcome to Marvel Monday. I'm your host, Surprise. So we've made it. We're in the top 20. Before we begin, though, I want to take a moment to celebrate what this week is. Avengers Endgame is like nothing we've ever seen before. Many franchises have survived for longer, and anyone could argue whether the stories have been better or not. But one thing that can't be denied is in the comic book industry, this is entirely unprecedented. This entire ride has been one of the most amazing experiences of all of our lives. Think of all the things we've done over the past 11 years, all the thousands of videos, articles, podcasts, and just normal conversations we've had about this universe. From the initial curiosity of whether or not an Iron Man movie would work, and the director and lead actor they chose to kick this thing off was, at the time, nothing if not questionable and controversial. The casting of the guy that played Human Torch to play Captain America. Would a Cap movie even work? I wasn't initially interested. I've never been a huge fan of his. The character was boring to me. In fact, I didn't care much for the Avengers at all. Not that I didn't like them, but I had a much more emotional investment in the X-Men, or even the Justice League. But by the time the movie started coming out, I realized something special was happening. Especially when the Avengers came out. Then we had something. That's when the world started taking notice. It worked, and it was done correctly. 4 of them had their own story. Black Widow was in Iron Man 2, and Hawkeye was in Thor. We had seen all of them, and now we were seeing them come together. But for it to continue, year after year we got 1, then 2, then 3 MCU movies coming out per year. All of them were at least better than the many of the movies any other franchise could offer us. And then they did it. I won't go too much into my opinion of Infinity War yet, but they put it all together, and they left us, for a year, waiting for the true results of the snap. Number 20, Spider-Man. The first Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man film was so good for its time. Now, almost 20 years later, you can see the cracks and tears, but back then, we were in for a real treat. Aside from X-Men and Blade, we hadn't seen a superhero movie look this good in all our lives, and it was Spider-Man. No character is more universally loved and well-known than Spider-Man by kids of all ages from all over the world. The only negative things I have to say about this movie, really, is the fact that it's 20 years old now and feels like it's older. It looks its age, but also used such little CGI that it doesn't look terrible at all. Maguire was way better in the role than I had anticipated from him. We all know the famous kiss scene. James Franco was great as Harry to me, and now that I've seen more of his work, I see just how good a performance we got out of him for this. Willem Dafoe was brilliant as always, and Green Goblin was a great first live-action villain for Spider-Man. The suit looks a little goofy now, but back then I never noticed it. A very solid movie. Number 19, Spider-Man Homecoming. As I've mentioned before, all the movies from here on out are so good, it comes down to personal preference. I love Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I love Tom Holland as Peter Parker. This is a version of him we didn't know we were missing until we got it, and when we did, I was so blown away by this man. He has been more than amazing as the character to me. Michael Keaton was phenomenal as Vulture, and the fact that they made such a goofy character work in the MCU is a statement of itself. Beautifully played out twist with whose Liz's dad was, too. Not sure how much a fan I am of the direction they went with Flash Thompson, and I do wish they'd use a little less language for his solo movies, only because so many kids love Spider-Man. Also, not sure if I like the Michelle MJ thing they have going on, but I'll give that a chance in the next Spider-Man solo film coming out this summer. Aside from those small, iffy comments about it though, I loved this movie. Number 18, Ant-Man. This movie surprised me with how much I liked it. I didn't know if I was going to like Paul Rudd in this universe. I didn't know how much I was going to like the character. I do wish this one had introduced Wasp, and that it had come much earlier so they could have been Avengers earlier. But would it have worked? Let's be honest, I think they probably released this movie at the right time for the entire franchise and universe for it to all work together. I do wish we could get a movie of a young Hank Pym and even Janet Van Dyne working with S.H.I.E.L.D., and maybe even being approached by Fury as the first to actually be shown the Avengers Initiative, only to turn it down. But again, this is what we got, and it was a smash. From Lewis and his stories to Hydra and 10 Rings being in it, this was a fun movie from beginning to end, and I'm glad we got what we got, and when we got it. Number 17, Deadpool 2. Another new movie on our list. I'm going to consider this and the Christmas special all in one. First, to mention the Christmas edition, how cool were the Fred Savage scenes? I enjoyed all of them. As far as the movie is concerned, I didn't like it as much as the first one, but I definitely enjoyed it. Domino was my favorite new character. The rest of the X-Force, that was a cool gag to play on all of us. All of the X-Force fight scenes from the trailer were never in the movie because they all died within seconds of their first action together. That was one of the best meta bits from the entire series. True breaking of the fourth wall to me. I've never been a huge Cable fan, and this movie didn't make me like him any more or any less. Still very apathetic towards the character. My opinions on the character were not swayed by Josh Brolin's performance, nor were they a product of it. I've just never been a fan. This was a very solid movie, but the first one was so good I have it ranked higher, as well as the other 15 movies ahead of it. Number 16, Spider-Man 2. I am deferring to the court of public opinion a bit on this one. So many people consider this the best Spider-Man movie of all time, so I let their vote place this one above all the rest of the Spider-Man movies on my list as well. I have no reason to argue. Alfred Molina was superb as Dr. Octopus. The writing was the best of the franchise. I think Peter losing his powers from not using them was a little bit silly, but aside from that, I think this was a very solid movie, quite deserving of the spot it is claimed. The train fight scene was so iconic that they even included it in the Spider-Verse cartoon movie, which I would have loved to have included in this list, but I felt like if I included it, I would have to include all the animated movies and we'd be here all day. Suffice it to say that the train scene was one of the most memorable superhero movie scenes of all time. Number 15, X-Men. The first X-Men movie. The first Fox superhero movie. So many firsts with this film. Aside from Blade, it was really the first successful superhero movie, the first to be taken seriously, and it was definitely like nothing we had ever seen before. Nobody knew who Hugh Jackman was back then. Now it's impossible to think of Wolverine and not think of him. I think this is the best version of Cyclops we ever got. Famke Janssen as Jean Grey, Halle Berry as Storm, Patrick Stewart as Xavier. And even though Ian McKellen is very well known in Europe, many of us in America, or especially the younger audience, didn't know him like we do now. Rebecca Romijn was awesome as Mystique. Not the best Sabretooth, but Ray Park was cool as Toad, and we even got the little Darth Maul nod where he did the little bit of action with the pole while fighting Storm. I wish they had done better with Storm's accent, or had just dropped it then instead of later, and that god-awful Toad joke she told. Aside from those few things, this movie is ranked as high as it is because it was the first in so many ways. While it has aged, it definitely holds a special place in my heart as a fan of the animated series. It wasn't perfect, but I finally had an X-Men movie after being a fan since the 80s, and I loved it. Number 14, Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember when this movie came out. I believed in Marvel by this point and figured it would be good, but it was also on the heels of Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World, which were arguably the worst movies the MCU had put out to that point. So with all these things considered, I decided not to see this one in theaters. Coincidentally, this would be the last MCU movie I would miss in theaters. Once I did see it, oh boy did I regret not going. It had the feel and charm of the first Star Wars movie. It had the action and comedy of a blockbuster film, and had some of the least likely heroes to fall in love with. Who knew we would fall in love with a giant tree that only said one thing repeatedly? Who knew a foul-mouthed rodent would become one of the sharpest and most interesting characters in the entirety of the MCU? Who knew Dave Bautista would kill it as Drax, his underutilization notwithstanding? From Nebula to Ronan, and even the Mad Titan himself actually showing up and having more than just a post-credits cameo, to Gamora and Star-Lord, the Collector, all the Easter eggs in his vault, the first blatant mention of the Infinity Stones. This movie had so much to offer us. It was an absolute masterpiece, and we haven't even mentioned the fun soundtrack. Number 13, X-Men: Apocalypse. I know there are many people who didn't like this movie. I'll be the first to admit it had flaws. I didn't actually like Apocalypse very much in this, or at least the actor that played him, and there were some parts that felt forced, such as Jean Grey, the Phoenix Force, and even the Wolverine cameo. This is also the movie it became clear Jennifer Lawrence had been Mystique for at least one too many movies. But when you balance that against some of the best displays of mutant abilities to date, Magneto finally using his magnetic shield, many nods to 1960s X-Men comics, and Olivia Munn as Psylocke, I still place it where my heart felt it should go. Maybe not quite a top 10 movie, and the case can certainly be made that it could be a little lower on the list, but this is my list, and as I said, so much of the good outweighed the bad to me. Plus, as I've mentioned before, X-Men is my favorite comic entity of all time, so to see some of the elements on screen that this movie displayed, I have to place it here. I just enjoyed it too much not to. Number 12, Doctor Strange. As a big fan of BBC TV, and especially Sherlock, I was ecstatic when they cast Benedict Cumberbatch as Dr. Stephen Strange. I can't think of anyone else I would rather see in the role. As I watched the movie, I was blown away by the things I saw on the screen before me. I'm not sure that Tilda Swinton was the correct choice for Ancient One, but I do think she's a phenomenal actress and she did a pretty good job. The story was adapted very well, and the acting was great. Caecilius, Mordo, Wong, all of them were spectacular. Such a fun movie from beginning to end, and I even liked how they did Dormammu. I was shocked how quickly they had Strange in his accident, but then it seemed to drag just a little bit. I'm not sure how much time passed from when he first showed up at Kamar-Taj, and I think they could have portrayed the time elapsing a little bit better. But aside from those small gripes, I can't think of a better way this movie could have been made. Amazing execution and a beautifully made movie. Number 11, Iron Man. So we end this list with the one that started it all. This movie wasn't perfect, and you can tell it's over 10 years old now, but it gets this placement for two reasons, if for nothing else. First, it started it all, just as I said. Secondly, it made me care about Iron Man and Tony Stark. There was so much more to it, but those two reasons alone had me place it this highly. Jeff Daniels was great as Obadiah Stane, and Gwyneth Paltrow was a perfectly cast Pepper Potts. The only thing I didn't like was Terrence Howard as Rhodey, but that got fixed later, so I won't harp on that too much. I also must mention Robert Downey Jr. and the job he has done being the face of this franchise. It was a bold and ballsy move by Marvel to choose him, as he was just starting to make his comeback from his life being in a very dark place. Also, just as a side note, I find it funny that we have two different iterations of Sherlock and Watson in the MCU, with Downey and his Watson, Jude Law, and Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman all in the MCU in one way or another. Also, Samuel L. Jackson, cast as Nick Fury, was an underrated casting choice. The best post-credit scene of its time, and the beginning of the post-credit scene being an integral part of the MCU, it was bold to bring up the Avenger Initiative 4 years before the Avengers movie, for them to take their time and build it properly, and for them to even mention it in the first of the movies, albeit in a post-credit scene. I know I didn't spend much time talking about the actual movie, but I think the greatest feat that this movie achieved was all the things I've mentioned, and we've all seen it by now. We all know it was a very good movie. So there you have it. Top 10 comes next week. I'm very excited to bring the top 10 to you, and I can't overstate just how much I'm enjoying making this list. Tell me what you disagree with in the comments below. What do you think the number one movie will be? Are you going to see Endgame this weekend? Comment below, and until next time,
have a good one.